Hello, welcome to the beginning of my October spooky month. So for October I've decided to do a little reading vlog style thing following along the previous video where I talked about my spooky October TBR. In that video I imagine I'll have talked about 16 spooky books that I have. I'm starting early because I finished my September TBR and I didn't really feel like reading or trying to read a book in between 27th to the 1st. I wasn't really sure how to decide which ones to read out of the 13 first, so I used my trusty old spinner wheel and I just hid the ones that weren't the 13. The first book we're reading is Feeding the Monster by Anna Bogoskaya. I started it last night, got through the introduction and some of the first chapter. It'll be cool to read a non-fiction book about horror. I'm not sure if I'm in the mood for it currently, but I think it's just my brain switching from fiction to non-fiction, which sometimes takes me a little while. I think I will find a lot of value in this book. And she's already been talking about Mike Flanagan and Shirley Jackson and a bit of Jordan Peele. All the references, most of the references I'm currently getting. Also, it's just nice to be reading about someone who loves horror. I'll give an update when I have something more to say or when I finish this one and I get on to my next one. Hello, I have finished Feeding the Monster a few nights ago now, actually. For my last update, I thought I was just struggling with switching from a heavy fiction book to non-fiction, but I think I just disliked this book, which I'm sad about because it was a gift and I hope to like my book gifts. But also just the content was like something that I'm interested in, so I thought I would be more likely to enjoy it. When I finished this book and read the other reviews that people had said, I was happy to see that a lot of others had the same issues with this book that I did. I felt like the majority of the arguments were just really half-cooked. There wasn't really like an overarching argument throughout the entire novel that I could really see. The intro was very promising and made me think that there was like a more cohesive strand throughout this book tying everything together. Because a lot of her arguments felt also inflated by other writers' theories, and like she was kind of adding to those rather than like propositioning anything new. I don't feel like I learnt anything new from this book, aside from having a good reference list for new TV shows, movies, and books. Another theme that I noticed the further I got through this book is that a lot of the time it feels like the chapters end up just becoming plot overviews of the books, TV shows, movies that she's talking about, and it's very spoiler heavy. That might be a bit of a me problem, but also I don't know if those spoilers added any weight to her argument. Like, she probably could have cut a lot of that out and strengthened the actual argument rather than going through the plot. So there are like multiple different chapters throughout this book which tackle the overarching themes of horror. So I can't remember them off the top of my head. I think it's like pain, hunger, anxiety, fear, and power. And I think the power one was the strongest one of the book. That was just more interesting. I felt like there was a little less plot overviews there and more of an argument. Unfortunately, that doesn't really make up for me feeling disengaged and unsatisfied with the rest of the book, to be honest. I just felt like these were segments of multiple different essays stitched together. This is a really minor pet peeve as well, but it's something that editors should have caught really rather than the author. At the end, you have like this watch list and this reading list, and some of them are repeated. When I was feeling quite frustrated throughout the book, this just feels sloppy. It feels lazy, and it was disappointing and sad. So this was a 2-star out of 5, which is relatively low. I'd say that's like the lowest I'd give a book that I don't hate, and maybe it would be more interesting to people who are like very new to horror. Not for me. So I started off my spooky month early, but technically I think I finished that before the end of September, so that counts as a September book. Let's start off spooky month on a bit of a higher note. The next book that the Picker Wheel chose for me was Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. Interesting so far. I wonder again if I've fallen into the trick of reading the blurb and spoiling myself a bit too much. But that's the blurb's fault, not my fault in my opinion. I don't know if I know too much because like I am only around 30 pages in, very much in the beginning, but I am wondering when what I've read on the blurb is going to really kick in. I'm enjoying the vibes so far of this though, so I will check in once I've read more, maybe halfway through this book or when I finished it, who knows. I will see you soon. Hello. Where I last left off, I was early on in Looking Glass Sound. I finished this book and wow. I knew there was a reason I had good vibes when I picked this one up. I can confirm there is no Cthulhu. I ran away with my ideas here. This book is incredible. For the first 200 pages or so, I was actually very annoyed at the book, but not for the writing or for the plot or anything like that. I was annoyed because the blurb gave away too much again. I had this whole rant prepared saying like, I just don't get why the blurb would say that. It's giving away way too much information. And I was just getting like increasingly angry with how much I already knew from reading the blurb. Like nothing was a shock. However, when I continued to read this book, most of my criticisms went out the window because so much changed. Having finished the book, I do still think the blurb is weirdly written with how much information and how much of the plot it chooses to reveal. We're talking about character motivations, character deaths, enough that when I was reading the book and these events occurred that I read on the blurb, I was annoyed that I wasn't given the chance to discover that and feel that myself as a reader. So my main criticism of the book, weirdly enough, isn't of the book itself, but of the blurb that was chosen. The narrative layers are very complex by the end, to the point where you're left wondering what is real from what you've just read and what is fake or fiction or left to be confirmed. And I wonder if they chose to do the blurb that way in order to give people a verified structure of what does happen. But even then, that doesn't make sense because I'm going to have to go into spoilers. This is like a book within a book within a book. So we've got many narrative layers here. And when I got to the part where Wilder goes to university and rooms with Sky, who is a man, I was like, oh my god, we got an accidental gay book, which is very funny to me. Except it's not really gay because Sky is a woman who stole Wilder's memoir and then continued to write as if Wilder was alive, like wrote a happy ending for Wilder as if he doesn't actually fucking die like 30 years before then. I suppose it is technically a queer book because Wilder is still bisexual, like that is not canon. It is very confusing. I did not spend a huge amount of time after finishing the book trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't, because I just wanted to feel what I was feeling first before trying to find the logical explanation. What I did go back and read is those square bracket chapters where it's revealed that it's a game they used to play where the last word in each sequence spelled out a message, and whoa, it was such a treat. So this was a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely loved it, and I will definitely pick up one of her books again. So I finished that on the 3rd of October, and then shortly afterwards, the Picker Wheel chose The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. I finished this book last night, and this book, I really wish I could say that this is a better book, and I was hopeful for the first quarter or so of the book before I realized this wasn't going to get any better, and I kind of just resigned myself to my fate of getting through this book. Now, by no means was this a difficult book to get through. It was readable, and I was like somewhat interested in seeing how the plot resolved. It was not very well written, and in particular the dialogue was bad. The writing overall was very telly rather than showy, to the point where entire character thoughts were just written very plainly rather than having them crafted in any way, shape or form. The dialogue is stilted and badly written. Often it just felt there again for exposition or for people to speak their thoughts out loud rather than kind of following what dialogue and spoken word actually sounds like, particularly kind of in the therapy session and the parts of the book where Alejandra, our main character, is kind of processing her emotions and how she feels about things. I feel like we're seeing post-therapy note-taking from Alejandra rather than a way that people think, or a blog post, if that makes sense. It felt very practiced. It didn't feel super raw or the way that people think. I just feel like there wasn't any thought put into how to actually craft realistic and engaging dialogue or narrative fiction. Throughout this book, there are overarching messages on the intersection of misogyny, colonialism, generational trauma, motherhood, and what I'm assuming is supposed to be postnatal depression, but also kind of wrapped up in motherhood and people who don't want to become mothers becoming mothers. These messages were just incredibly ham-fisted throughout this book as well, which is a shame because these are interesting messages to be talking about, interesting concepts to take on. And I think that in any other book where these messages, these concepts were handled with care and creativity, this would have been great, but it wasn't handled with care or creativity. The other huge issue I had with this book is that the characterization was just non-existent. It was not good. When we talk about character development, and I mean in the sense of getting to know a character when they're first introduced and also getting to see a character grow, this was just weak throughout the entire book. And I'd say the most developed character was Alejandra, but even then, I feel like I was just constantly told what Alejandra was feeling. And even if Alejandra is the main character and had the best characterization, this still left so much to be desired because the characterization wasn't good to begin with. Melanie, who is Alejandra's therapist, who comes in maybe a quarter through the book and remains throughout the book, has zero characterization. I shit you not, she just exists to be Alejandra's therapist. She was so 2D, she could have fallen over. Minor spoiler, I was literally expecting a Melanie reveal where it was like, she's evil, or she's a demon, she's leading Alejandra down the wrong path, because Melanie's characterization was so weak and so non-existent that I thought it was an intentional choice the author had made. Alejandra's husband, Matthew, was also clearly supposed to represent non-committal, babied husbands who never do a thing. All the emotional, physical home labor is put onto their wives because like they sustain the family and they uphold the patriarchal system. But he was written like cartoonish levels of evil and bad that none of his characters stuck. Like every time he came into a scene and was just like, where's my dinner? Okay, it made me laugh because it was like, this is not a real character. This is just like a patriarchal idea that is badly written into this book to make you feel sorry for our main character. And I did feel sorry for Alejandra, but not because of her shitty husband, because her shitty husband didn't feel like a character who actually fucking existed. He was just cartoonish. That was also annoying. So when it comes to like the scary factor of this book, I was not scared at all. There was nothing that was particularly scary to me. There was a lot of visceral gore in one of the finale chapters, which I'm not going to go into depth about. That was kind of like the most horrific element of the book, but other than that, I didn't feel like there was any sense of real threat to Alejandra or her family because no one felt real, nothing felt real. The dialogue from evil characters, let's say, was laughably bad, and I think even if a book isn't scary to me when it's marketed as a horror book, as long as the other elements of the book hold up, I'm not too pissed off because I'm aware that I have a pretty high bar when it comes to horror. I was expecting to be spooked out a little bit, potentially, and because all of the characterization and the writing was just weak, I don't feel like I got anything from this book because I certainly wasn't scared by it and I certainly wasn't entertained. That's an over-exaggeration because I was entertained by some of the segments, and that was the ones written back in the 15 to 1600s, and there was also I think like a 1970s or 1980s segment in this book, and those were much better written. I think they were still clunky, but because of the time period it kind of didn't seem so in your face, and I think this was just better written and more engaging to me. I kind of wish that the entire book was written in that timeline, so we had like a historical horror. I think that I'm just annoyed that a book with a great story idea and positive messaging for liberation sucked. Reading this book actually reminded me of a book that I read earlier this year called Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañá, and this is set in the 1850s at the Mexican-American border during the Mexican-American War, and just held up so much better as a book. If you want to go read a Mexican horror book with like some folk elements in there, I'd recommend Vampires of El Norte over this book. And I feel kind of bad bringing up another book when reviewing one book, and especially when reviewing that book so harshly, but this was just not well written. Didn't enjoy it. So I finished that last night and I already got started on my next book. So the Pick a Wheel then chose my third and final August A Box of Stories subscription, and that was When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. So yeah, very funny that all three have been chosen in a row. I'm 50 pages into this and I'm already enjoying it so much better. Way darker, way more horror filled. This book just feels very well crafted. So I'm excited to get more into it. See you later. Hello everyone, it is the 9th of October and I broke my promise and I went and finished this book before giving an update. I'm just going to change this angle. I'm not happy with this angle. When the Wolf Comes Home. I finished this about an hour and a bit ago now. Oh my goodness. Silly little me thinking, how could this be anything but a werewolf novel? I feel so unimaginative now to think that. Nat Cassidy, I did not know your game. I'm sorry. This is such a well-crafted novel, and I'm not gonna lie, when I found out that the main character is like an improv comedian, stand-up comedian, and that she has a tendency to turn to humor to kind of cope with things, I was a little concerned that we were gonna have like a bit of an insufferable inner voice, this character who keeps breaking the tone of the book or breaking the pace of the book in order to make a joke. But I think Nat Cassidy has such a good control over tone and a character's inner voice that it never really felt like we were breaking the pace of the book, or that none of the characters were dealing appropriately with what, like, the batshit crazy events that were going on in the book because they said a joke about it. And there are like huge moments of real emotional depth from our main character Jess. There are like also significant stretches of time where she's fucking depressed and dealing with a lot of grief and anger and fear. She didn't feel one-dimensional as a character. So that was really refreshing and just shows to me that Nat Cassidy is a wonderful writer. Okay, spoiler alert, the way that this is not a werewolf novel, I got like an inkling, and because of the reviews that I'd watched and read, I knew that I should have expected something more expansive. So I'm not 100% sure that I would have picked up on this as much as I did had I not read those reviews beforehand. But perspectives switch in this novel. So there's a moment where you're from the perspective of the dad who's chasing his runaway son. You hear him saying, like, he's clearly not human. We've seen and believe that his dad is turned into a werewolf or a massive wolf creature outside of our main character's apartment. But this is later on in the book. And he talks about like breaking into the main character's colleague's house, which is where she's hiding out. He mentions something about having like multiple eyes or multiple heads. Hang on, werewolves have 2 eyes, right? Multiple eyes could mean 2, but like it's not going to be 2. He was saying his multitude of eyes or something along the lines of that. And that was when there was the first clue that I was like, okay, so we're not explicitly from the perspective of a werewolf right now. We're from like this culmination of a werewolf creature things. That was the first inkling that this wasn't a straight up werewolf book. At the end of the first section, things get batshit crazy. This is like completely expansive of what you were expecting. And that is when Jess and the boy are holding up in a hotel to just try and hunker down, figure out things for a little while, and she turns the TV on for this boy who's never seen anything. This boy who, like, we understand comes from an abusive background and has been deprived of TV, books, friends, like any kind of connection with the outer world. He is seeing TV for the first time, and we assume it's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit comes on the TV, and the characters from Who Framed Roger Rabbit come outside of the TV screen and are homicidal, murderous maniacs, and you're like, oh, this is the type of book we're dealing with. It isn't that it's a werewolf novel, but that whatever the boy fears comes to life. He can make things come to life. And it's not only fear, the way they explain it is like a trigger of very strong emotions. So it can also be joy or happiness. But we're talking about a 5-year-old boy who comes from an abusive background. So naturally, fear is the most powerful trigger for him. So a lot of scary things come out instead. So that completely changes the pace and the background of the book. So yeah, the actual plot of this book is you find out from an FBI agent who's assigned to the case to chase after Jess and the boy that the father was part of this top secret government scientific experimentation where all of the participants were supposed to be sterilized so that nothing could come from them. However, they forgot to sterilize the father, who then obviously goes and has a kid who essentially has crazy powers. So now we have a completely different framework for this story where like anything can happen, any creature. This book is simultaneously heartbreaking and heartwarming, and the heartwarming part comes from the development and the progression of Jess's relationship towards the boy. And this is where the emotional depth comes in again, where she doesn't immediately feel maternal towards this boy. At first, she's kind of like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Obviously, I'm just going to take him in under my wing for a second because I can't leave him alone with this, what she thinks is like a fucking werewolf. As the story progresses, I've seen some people criticize this book to not really know why Jess would stick around with this boy, but I think it's that sense of, you know, that she inherently has a fear of abandonment and she doesn't want to continue that cycle, because the book also provides this background that Jess's father has recently died and that he was an incredibly absent father who abandoned her when she was quite young. To me, a significant enough character motivation as to why Jess would want to stick with this boy, but I guess for some people it might not be enough motivation. There's a certain switch in the book when she's like desperately begging the boy not to do something and she calls him baby, and this is quite late in the book, and like my heart, oh my goodness, I have never seen this done in a book before, and I was so shocked and amazed by it that I like sat up in bed when I was reading. But there is a certain character in this book who is disappeared. They are made non-existent. And when this moment happens, the ink has faded, but it's an intentional misprint. Okay, you see that there? Never here, never here. And I might have to take a picture for the camera to capture this, but there's also like a very faint third never here where you can just barely see it. And this happens another time on the next page where the character's name is mentioned and half of his name, yeah, has faded out. You can see it there, like half of his name is gone. It is just wild. I didn't ever consider that this was something that you could use as a technique as an author. I genuinely need to find out if this has been employed in any other book, because this is the first time I've come across it. So overall, like, there's a pretty obvious messaging here on overcoming fear and nature versus nurture, particularly with the boy. But what I enjoyed is that it doesn't feel like Nat Cassidy is like bashing you over the head repeatedly with this messaging, because it slots in so well with this fucked up, crazy whirlwind story that he's created, which is inherently linked to fear and manifesting this fear and how to overcome that. And I found that Nat Cassidy's afterword was also really touching and gave a lot of insight into the story that he's created. So I gave When the Wolf Comes Home 5 stars out of 5. This is a 5-star. I really debated whether or not this would be a 4.5, but I couldn't find any reason to not give it the extra 0.5 star and just make it a 5-star. What can I fault about this book? I would recommend When the Wolf Comes Home for anyone looking for, you know, a splatterfest. It is gory, it is horrific. Some may say that it is kind of indulgent in its gore, but for me it was like, I don't give a fuck, this is fun. With a surprising amount of heart and emotional depth. Great book, and do not look further into this book or listen to the spoiler parts of this review if you don't want to be spoiled, because I think this is best going into blind. So I spun the picker wheel, and the next book that we got was My Sister the Serial Killer. I will see you later. Bye-bye. Hi, it is the 11th of October, and I'm here to give an update on My Sister the Serial Killer. I am halfway through this book, and I'm having mixed feelings about it. I think that what I can't really get past at this point is how short these chapters are, because the length of a book doesn't necessarily indicate the pace of a book. So I knew this was going to be a short book, but I didn't know if it would be medium or fast-paced. This is so fast-paced, I was not expecting. It's like breakneck speed. I think the longest chapter we've had so far is maybe 4 pages at a push. Most of the chapters are like 1.5 pages, even a half a page sometimes. And I'm finding that it's making it difficult for me to feel connected to any of the characters or the story, particularly since each chapter is rapidly transporting you to a different setting, or perhaps back into the main character's memories and occasions of the past with her late father. Like, we're just jumping around all over the place. I think that's my main thought. I'm finding it a little difficult to position myself and feel immersed in the book. Other than that, I think I was potentially looking for more humor in this book. I probably misunderstood the blurb to be positioning it as a dark humor, and I don't think it is a dark humor. Also, I guess a little spoiler, but some of you may know, I forget, this is going to sound weird, how little the number of people you need to kill in order to be deemed a serial killer. So in my head from reading the blurb, I thought the main character's sister had murdered tens of people, of men, but it's 3. It's a very strong open, a very gripping, striking open to a book, and then kind of not much is going on, because I guess maybe that's why it's so fast-paced. Like, there's not been another murder, and I'm 115 pages in, and I'm just thinking, like, I understood that the main crux of the book would be our main character trying not to get her work crush killed by her sister, but that time period is going on longer than I thought. I do suppose it also makes sense that her sister doesn't go and kill every man she meets like a week after meeting them or being with them. So yeah, it is very different from what I expected. I think I'm going to try and finish it today, but it is somewhat telling to me that for such a short, fast-paced book, I'm not really thinking about it that much when I'm not reading it. I'm not thinking I want to get back to this straight away, and I'm not hugely excited to get back into reading it. I think that is pretty telling that it may not be a book for me. You know, I'm willing to explore. I might change my opinion by the time I finish it. We'll just have to see. I'm actually at the point where I'm wanting already to spin my picker wheel and find out what book I'm going to be reading next. Like, should I just spin it now? Too late, I'm doing it. What's our next book? It's chosen volume 2 of MADK. That'll mean I'll be reading 1 to 3. So those are my next 3 books. Ooh, that has motivated me actually. I'm gonna go ahead and finish My Sister the Serial Killer tonight and get onto MADK tomorrow. I'll see you later. Hello, I am back. It's been a few days since I last checked in. I've not been very well. I did go and finish My Sister the Serial Killer the night that I last filmed. To wrap up that book, unfortunately, everything that I said in the last segment when I was halfway through remained true upon finishing it. I'm sad because I expected more from this book and I really thought it would be dark comedy vibes, and that was just absolutely not what it was. The chapters are just too short. I don't know how you're supposed to really feel much for a lot of the characters or the story. I think a lot of what happened actually did end up being quite predictable as well. I finished the book and I didn't have any lasting feelings. I gave this 3 stars, so perfectly average book. I wouldn't say I'd ever read it again or that it will stick with me, which is a bit sad, but not every book can be one that I enjoy. On Sunday, I did then go and finish all 3 volumes of MADK. This was so fun in comparison. I felt myself feeling invigorated again, just thinking, yay. Volume 1. I forgot how dark this motherfucker is. I'm not going to recommend this to anyone who is the faint of heart or who cannot deal with darker content because it is not a pleasant read. And when I was around halfway through, I was wondering, because my original rating was 4.5 stars, I was thinking, am I going to keep this at 4.5 because it's sad and I feel bad about it. But by the time I finished Volume 1, I remembered exactly why it ended up being a 4.5. What makes you feel sad, I think, is Makoto, the main character, really is quite pitiful and very young and naive. Even though he technically puts himself in this situation by summoning the demon in the first place, with the knowledge that that will lead to the end of his life, what he doesn't know when he does this is that he will be reborn in hell and then have this awful, abusive mentor looking over him, you know, not really looking after him. That's where the pity for him comes in, where you see the atrocities that happen to him in hell, but it makes sense. It's hell, and he's surrounded by demons, and he is, in essence, a demon at this point. It's kind of unpleasant witnessing what happens to Makoto until his evil side kicks in. Everyone's evil. Everyone's evil in this story. This is where it gets fun, and because it's less of like this young, naive teenager being taken advantage of by demons, it becomes he is a little asshole himself and gets very, very power hungry and is obsessed with beating his mentor. It almost kind of becomes like a cat and mouse story. So yeah, despite the very dark content in probably the first half, there's dark content throughout the entirety of all 3 volumes, but the first half of this in particular is a little bit of a rough ride. But when you get into the character kind of developing further and adjusting to his life in hell and developing this drive and this motivation to best all the other demons in hell, it becomes a bit more fun. And I think Ryo Suzuri, as the author and the artist, is really personable. You have this small afterword where they share some of the character designs. They share that they're just this regular person who wanted to write this crazy, kinky erotica set in hell with a messed up protagonist who likes cannibalism in a very certain way. So this remained at 4.5 for me. I don't think I changed my ratings. Going on to Volume 2, I didn't remember as much from Volume 2 as I did Volume 1. So getting the reintroduction of Archduke Jay's brother, that character, was really fun. This is a little bit chunkier as well, so I feel like you get further into the characters and the world. What works really well in the world of MADK is there are multiple time skips. So I don't feel like the author spends a huge amount of time on traditional character development of the main character, in the sense that we don't see the day-to-day life of Makoto. Really, this story is told over, technically I imagine it's like hundreds of thousands of years, because the human world moves faster than the demon world does. So it's been 3 years post Volume 1, I believe, when we start Volume 2. We're talking spoilers, but Makoto is sent on his first mission as a demon. In these 3 years, he's developed quite a lot. He's been working at a brothel, observing other demons, understanding how the hierarchy of the underworld works. And Jay believes that he's ready to go on his first mission, which is to kind of collect what they call these golden nuggets, which is, I believe, someone's soul, and this functions as the underworld's currency. You collect someone's nuggets, or you try and convert them to become a demon themselves. It kind of depends on their power and their drive and their motivation. And Jay sends Makoto off on his first mission to collect a soul, these nuggets. And Jay doesn't let Makoto know who he's sending him to. Makoto goes to collect his own father's soul. So his father is dying. Makoto has no clue that's who he's going to. And Makoto appears in the vision of himself. So his father recognizes him and says, "Oh, my final prayer was to see you again." And Makoto's getting a bit emotional, thinking, "Oh God, how am I supposed to collect my father's soul? This is messed up." However, the father is revealed that his last wish was to murder his own son because he was so ashamed that his son was found dead, naked, with a bunch of cultish demon paraphernalia surrounded by him, and also the fact that it was clear that his son was gay. You really see the worst in people throughout MADK. Again, this very abusive dynamic between Jay and Makoto, and seeing how power and domination, the search for power and besting others, destroys people. Makoto's whole character motivation is to beat Jay. How the hierarchy works here is that any demon that's above you in power, you cannot say their full name. Saying their full name rips you apart, literally, physically, and will kill you. And Makoto has developed amazingly fast in the past 3 years. He's managed to say a whole bunch of demons' names and has risen up in the social hierarchy in Hell, and is very much seen as Jay's prodigy. Makoto's main goal is to figure out what the hell Jay's full name is, and then figure out how to become more powerful than him to say his name. And obviously after this whole father experience, it's multiplied by 100. And this is how he ends up finding Jay's brother and uses Jay's brother against him to try and further this. We find out more actually about Jay's creator, so a bit more of Jay's backstory, and that was eye-opening and entertaining, and of course you get some fucked up erotic scenes in this one too. This one is just a bit more entertaining and fun because you open the story, Makoto's already a demon, he's already fucked up, he's older, and he knows what he's getting himself into, so you feel less pitiful for him because it doesn't feel like you're watching this teenager get abused as much as the first volume. I remained at my 4.5 star rating for this one. I was so happy to finally get to volume 3, the volume I've never read before, the biggest one of all 3, and I was very excited to see how Ryo Suzuri would finish this story. Now, this was not where I expected the story to go. I don't know if I feel satisfied by this ending or not. I am still thinking about it 3 days later, which shows to me that I enjoyed it much more, and it also has a much longer lasting impact on me. But I don't know why. Is it because I enjoyed it, or is it because I want more? And both things are could be seen in a positive light of me wanting more from this artist, but also perhaps that they didn't deliver upon what I wanted for the final volume. I feel like volume 3 goes fully into fever dream territory where you're kind of wondering what's real and what's not, because there are multiple scenes in which you're going into Jay's past through a hallucinogenic how do you say that word? Hallucinogenic. You're going into Jay's past through Makoto drugging him with a hallucinogenic in order to try and best him and weaken him. There are a few times from Jay's perspective where you're not sure if something's actually happening or what timeline we're in. Further to this, I think it's now been 5 years, so we have a 5-year time skip from volume 2, which means we're an entire 8 years ahead from volume 1. Makoto is very much a well-established demon. He has bested quite a few of the original characters we see in volume 1 that he is terrified of and has no clue how he's ever going to beat them. Within volume 3 as well, I think there's even a 100-year time skip. So it's crazy. This is what I mean when this story spans multiple years. It's a little trippy. You're trying to figure out where exactly we are, how old our characters are, what has actually happened in that timeline. But I wouldn't say this is a negative. It's just positioning you in the eternity that is Hell. So it makes a lot of sense. I feel like actually a good comparison is perhaps season 3 of NBC's Hannibal, where it becomes so much of a cat and mouse game that you kind of get lost in it, and you kind of end up questioning what is the entire point of this. But I think that as Ryo Suzuri's overarching message is that power will drive people insane and will drive people to lengths that makes things unrecognizable. This one was a wild ride, and the ending in particular, clearly the message is supposed to be the cyclical nature of seeking out power and the drive to gain power, and how destructive that drive is. But whether or not that makes a satisfying ending to a 3-volume manga, particularly when, if you're someone who enjoys the very messed up abusive dynamics of mentor or mentee, and then that mentee trying to bridge the gap within the context of hell, and demons as well, so we can't really hold them to human morals. This is just not how this world works. It ends up not being a super satisfying ending, unfortunately. But I also totally understand why that's where we end up. I don't really know how else MADK could have ended. So it's less of a criticism and more of a personal wish that something else happened. But how do I even wrap up MADK? I ended up giving volume 3 4 stars, and I think it's mainly because I felt a little dissatisfied by the ending. And I think maybe around 3/4 in, the story dragged just a little bit, where I felt maybe could have been shortened, maybe edited a little bit better. But I do have one overarching criticism. I think it's most prominent in volume 1, and I'm not sure if it is supposed to be intentional, like a self-censorship technique. But there are times, particularly in volume 1, where I can't really figure out what I'm looking at. In terms of character action and where things are placed on the page, just trying to understand what body part I'm looking at, what facial expression I'm looking at. There's a lot of swirly art styles, and that can sometimes make the page look a bit muddy, and it's a little difficult as a reader to fully follow what we're looking at. However, the flip side of that is that you end up having some really interesting compositions on the page. I really like how Ryo Suzuri places their panels. I find it very interesting, and that's what makes a lot of MADK fun, but it makes it confusing at the same time. That's, I think, why overall none of these are 5 stars for me, because there are times where I was just staring at the same page for a long time thinking, what the fuck am I looking at? MADK, done. On Sunday night, I spun the picker wheel and ended up with my next book, and that's The Invisible Hotel by Yeji Ham. I'm very early on into this book, so I don't really have any comments just yet. It's already creepy. I'm like 4 chapters in, and I'm a little creeped out and confused and disgusted. And that's what I like in my horror books. So we're doing well. I'll check back in later once I finish The Invisible Hotel. Bye-bye. Hello, it is the 25th of October and I finished The Invisible Hotel. I finished this a while ago. This was somehow not the book that I was expecting it to be, and also is the book that I thought it would be. So I'll start off with the positives, and mostly it comes from the beginning of the book, where the premise is just so creepy and haunting. Just the concept of keeping your ancestral bones in the bathtub to wash them every morning as part of your morning routine. And that concept is quite frankly horrifying. What's interesting is that this is a custom of Dalbit, the small village in Korea that our main character comes from. So you hear her talking about escaping to Sydney, Australia, or Seoul, and getting away and being able to bathe in a bathtub. 'Cause currently she has to wash herself in the sink with cold water, and she once in the book tries to move those bones and defiantly tries to take a bath and is stopped by her mother. So it's obviously this barrier of generational trauma and the guilt and the literal hanging on to the traumas of your past and your ancestors and the guilt that comes from that. Conceptually, that was very creepy, haunting, and kind of just taken at face value from the first part of reading the book. You're thinking is this something normal? This is just what people do? And it is. And, she has her best friend that she complains to, and you're not really certain if this is just something that Yewon's family does themselves, or if this is just the custom of the South Korea that Yeji Ham has written in this book. But you find out through her best friend, who has recently escaped the village and moved to Seoul, is I'm so glad I don't have to wash these damn bones anymore. Okay, this is not something that's normal in this South Korea. This is very much a small traditional village custom that happens only in this village. I honestly think that the creeping, haunting atmosphere that the author manages to create in the first third of the book or so is really good. And that is kind of where most of my enjoyment from this book stops, unfortunately. I did not look very closely at the cover or anything about the author. I mistakenly thought that this was a Korean language book that had been translated into English, particularly since it was set in Korea and there were certain Korean words that they chose not to translate. I was feeling the translation was a little awkward, a little clunky. There was always, I do not do that, I will not do that, they do not think that. There was never don't, wouldn't, can't. There was none of that. So I was kind of sometimes this just becomes a little too clunky and feels awkward. I went into the front of the book looking for the translator before I realized, oh my god, this is an English language book. And I felt bad that I hadn't picked up on that earlier, but it reads like a translated book. It is really bizarre. And honestly, I think that this book probably deserves a better editor. I feel like another round of editing would have improved it significantly. And that the language overall is just, the choices made were a bit odd, and it just made reading it feel a bit strange and stilted. Whilst I feel like I understood the overarching themes, I came out of this book feeling like I was just not clever enough to understand the correlation between the strands of the different plot, how all these character interactions came together, the snippets of like news stories. These ideas and the characterization didn't really fully come together for me towards the end. Upon reading other people's reviews, a lot of people also said that they didn't feel clever enough to read this book, which I'm glad about. I'm glad it wasn't just me who was like, not every book is for everyone, but I was wondering, is this a me problem, or is this a way that the book is presenting things? Is that the problem here? There was a certain disconnection I felt to our protagonist. I don't know if this was supposed to be intentional on the author's part to kind of show that fragmentation of herself, of the many different selves that she wants to be. This person who's stuck in this small Korean village, who's sick of being constantly reminded of her past and her family's past, and the self that wants to go to the capital city and live a new exciting life with her friends, and this self that also feels that she can't live up to that version of herself. But I think this disconnection ultimately contributed to me feeling very distant to the plot, and then becoming further confused as to what I was really supposed to get from it. So again, maybe this book just isn't for me. This book was also very transient in nature, and this helped, particularly at the beginning, to create and maintain that haunting vibe. But there comes a point where a book becomes too transient and it becomes very confusing. And this book crossed that border too many times for me. Like, I'm not 100% sure when the main character was slipping into her recurring dream or nightmare, and what was then supposed to be real life, and if that was supposed to be the point of the narrative. I don't know what was intentional versus what was me just not picking up when things had actually switched between reality and dreams. I would say that I don't typically mind this in other books when you're not really 100% sure what's going on, but usually those books that I enjoy have a stronger plot or progression or characterization to focus on that means there's a payoff when it comes to these transient parts. But yeah, for me, The Invisible Hotel, it didn't pay off. It was too transient. And I kept on reading just thinking, there's going to be something here that clicks, that I will just get it. There'll come a point in the novel where this all comes together and I will understand. And it didn't happen, which was upsetting. My other main gripe with this book is that it's very much marketed as a horror novel. I mean, the cover and the fact that this arrived in a horror-themed book box. This is not horror. I don't believe this is strong enough to come under horror. This feels much more literary fiction with kind of haunting themes, with maybe subgenre of horror elements thrown in there, but it is definitely not strong enough as a horror book to stand alone to be marketed as horror. So I'm a bit frustrated with that. I think there's elements perhaps of like the horror of war and the horror of losing oneself and trauma and the fallout post-war, but is it horror? No, I don't think so. This is probably more just literary fiction. The bone-washing parts, obviously, there's like deeply unsettling, but these things are horrible, but I don't think they're horror. Yeah, I was expecting something different going into this book. I ended up giving The Invisible Hotel 3 stars. Again, an average rating, not necessarily a bad book, I just don't think it sat well with me. There's probably a better book in here with better editing and also more appropriate marketing of what genre this falls under. The next book I'm reading for Spooky October is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I've got my teeth into it already, as you can see. I'm definitely going slower with this one due to just being very busy and sick, and also wanting to really soak myself into this book. I don't want to talk too deeply about Rebecca in this video, mainly because this is going to have its own video where I talk about rereading it as part of my challenge, and I have many thoughts, many thoughts already to say. All I want to say is I am around 100 pages in, and already I feel like I'm in a warm embrace of a good friend. I am wondering how many more books I can get through before the end of October for this video. I don't know. We'll just have to see. So, it's October 1st. It's not October 1st, it's November 1st. We ran out of time, but I'm very happy with the progress that I've made, and it was a really fun month. So as of today, I am 375 pages into Rebecca, basically almost finished. Yesterday, I think I was around like 220 pages by midnight. So I'm gonna say that overall, I read around 9.5 books. As I said, I don't want to go into too much depth in Rebecca, but clearly I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to say. But I wanted to wrap up my spooky October reading vlog and take a look back and see what I've read and how many books overall. I think 9.5 books is really impressive. I was sat there thinking 13 or 16 books is crazy. I'm not going to get through all of those, but you know what? I was kind of close. I'm going to take you through my month and let's look at some of the stats together. October 2025, 9 books and overall 2.6k pages with an average 3 days time taken to finish a book. And my moods were dark, tense, emotional, mysterious, and funny. What did they... Oh, the Jonathan... Oh yeah, I forgot. I did also read Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. That's where the funny came in, and that was not on my original list. Average rating sitting at around 3.83 stars, which is a little bit on the higher end. I think the Haunting of Alejandra, which was the 2-star, really pulled most of this down. And then my most read pages was on the 12th, where I read 838 pages. But I want to clarify, that was when I finished a book, and then I went and read all 3 volumes of the MADK manga. So manga is obviously way faster to read. And then I think I may have even started on my next book that night. That's why the 12th of October I went sky fucking high with my pages all of a sudden. And yeah, here we go. You can see here, this is when I started getting sick, like 1 page. I definitely had a lot of fun this month. I just love reading spooky things, horror books, love it. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of a different video where I tried to do a vlog format, but as you can see, I'm not amazing at vlogging or filming while I'm actually reading the books. I tend to have most of my thoughts after the fact when I have a bit more time to take in all of the elements of the book. It's the 1st of November when I'm filming this, but with my schedule, I'm thinking you'll see this on the 12th of November, so hopefully there's enough of you out there who are still feeling spooky enough and interested enough in the books that I've read this month. Last month? Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in another video. Bye bye.